What does that actually look like in organizations right now from what you are seeing? Maybe Anna, can you give us some insights
Yes.
into
Um,
what you're seeing
I
there?
think I think this is exactly you kind of track the arc of how it evolved from early debates, and I'm sure Rebecca has been in many of those discussions, whether AI is even legitimate as a tool. But right now, in organizations, in my view, the conversation is more about where this coaching actually adds value inside organizational process and where it needs to be embedded, because I think what organizations are doing now, they're experimenting in broadening the scope of coaching implementation from pure L&D and personal development and career pathing, et cetera, to performance management, transformation, team collaboration. And most interestingly, what we've heard at our Coaching and Technology Summit in New York just a few weeks ago, companies are now using coaching as a way to transition organizations into AI fluency, AI adoption on a grander scale, not just, again, for personal use, but for broader organizational applications. That's where I see coaching becoming kind of growing up for being just a one-on-one tool to a we tool, how we as a team, how we as a unit, to even how we as an organization, where coaching is available to all 100,000 plus employees. I think this is what is emerging and what these technologies are making possible.
Thank you. Wow, that is a very interesting perspective that we're changing from how we know coaching over the last couple of years and decades to, new forms of coaching, new use cases, new ways to apply that. Now, and I know with the NYU kind of ecosystem that you're in and the collaboration that you're having going on with, technologists, HR and L&D leaders around the globe, you're likely speaking to some of the most advanced adopters in organizations, while you probably also speak to many others. But I'd love to hear a little bit maybe from Jule, who is predominantly working here in Europe and with clients in Germany. How do you see that going on in organizations today?
Mhm. Definitely not early adopters. I would put a big +1 on that. But we had a very, very similar development as to what Anna was describing. I remember very well the initial conversations, especially at CoachHub. The first conversations we had were not just, is coaching real, but yes, legitimacy of AI in coaching, around, can AI actually coach, kind of that very, very early conversations. And that conversation obviously has also shifted in Germany, although we might not be, at a point where probably a lot of US organizations are. I think the question that are being asked much more now around implementation and adoption, are kind of which, and Anna, you named some examples. I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning around the developmental moments that are actually, that we need to look at, and how do we support those, and how do we actually create learning systems, and think of where does AI support, and also which type of support is most effective. And this is a much more nuanced question that organizations are also asking here, as opposed to AI coaching, yes or no, hybrid, standalone, etc. I think one very, I guess, a different conversation that we have now that we had before is we're much more advanced in terms of thinking of integrated and hybrid solutions, which is, if you look at behavioral science literature, super powerful, right? Because when we look at behavior change, let's talk about leadership development, right? Behavior doesn't change because of a brilliant coaching conversation. It changes because we reflect, we practice, we receive feedback, we learn on the job, right? The majority of learning is informal and happens in the daily flow of work. And AI has a huge potential there, and is really well just positioned to support that learning process. So that's a much more, I would say, mature conversations that I see organizations having here. Another element, and I think this is something that's made me very skeptical of sort of very simplistic, I guess, success metrics, you would say, is that we talk a lot about engagement and how is the engagement in organizations when a tool is rolled out and implemented, but engagement doesn't really equal actual change of behavior, right? And so I think a question that now organizations here are starting to talk about, okay, what are the moments that we need to look at in terms of development with AI? And then also not just, are people having great conversations? Are people engaging with the technology? But also, for example, does it actually make them better leaders in the example of leadership development? So I think thinking from that angle, that's where the conversation has shifted to.